Everyone, hope everything is going well. Tonight, we have a new guest on. We've been exchanging messages for the past year or so. He is Michael from Imperial Sports Cards. What's happening?
Hey, Ro, how are you?
Good, good, good. All right, let's take a look at the comment that we have right now. Tim SF Giants, man, what's craculating AIH? All righty. So tell me about yourself. I know you're on Instagram, and just how did you get into this hobby?
Yeah, I, like a lot of kids, I would imagine, that are millennials, early 30s, started collecting during the junk wax era in the 90s. Cards were virtually everywhere. We were at our local book fair. I think they had like 92 Donruss, 92 Fleer, and so that's how I sort of started. And as a kid, cards became less popular, and what I really got into were autographs. That's sort of what I've collected over the course of my life. When I was a kid, I grew up in Texas. My dad would take us to the Astrodome and then what is now Minute Maid Park before the games, and my brother and I would, try to get as many autographs as we could from the visiting and the home team, and got really into it for a while, and probably collected 300-400 autographed baseballs over going to spring training and going to games. And then once you hit an adult, it doesn't feel right necessarily going to a game and standing next to a kid asking for an autograph. So at some point during college, I transitioned more to sort of buying collectibles on eBay and through some other companies like TriStar and Steiner. And my goal was to try to get a nice autographed baseball of every player that I liked growing up, of Hall of Famers and so forth. And I did that for a while. I did a lot of through the mail signatures, like you're doing, Rahul. That really worked out really well. It's surprising how many guys get back to you so quickly. But I remember sending baseballs to Whitey Ford and to guys like Don Newcomb, who is a Hall of Fame pitcher, not a Hall of Fame pitcher, Whitey was. But anyway, I'd get their autographs through the mail. And then, in 2019, I went to a card signing. I was in LA. I was living in LA at the time. It was Pedro Guerrero, who was a Dodgers star in the 80s. I went to a signing. And I remember seeing cards everywhere. It was a card show and an autograph signing. And I'm thinking, I guess cards are a thing again. I collected them as a kid, but didn't really hear or wasn't really into the hobby at all during much of my late teens, early adulthood. But I found a card that I liked and I picked it up, and I have it right here. It's a Fernando Valenzuela flawless card with the game used patch. I think I picked it up for like $40 at the time. And I kind of put it away, and a few months later, the pandemic hit, and same sort of story as everyone else. We were all at home, and I'm a physician. I was in training at the time, so I wasn't, going into the hospital as much. And all of a sudden, I had not a whole lot to do, and that's when I really got back into cards from the autograph space.
What's your best autograph that you have in your collection?
Oh, it's a good question. I have a Jackie Robinson autograph.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's probably in terms of value, probably the highest value one.
Do you have any other cards besides you?
Yeah. So I've got a few cards here I can kind of show off. I've over the last couple years, I've kind of realized that it's taken me a while to kind of find my niche, but growing up liking to get autographs, I pretty much now have an autographed baseball of every guy that I grew up liking. And I kind of moved over to sort of trying to collect autographed cards of some of these guys. And I'm now more focusing on vintage autographed cards. And so this is one that I recently picked up. This is a Sandy Koufax 57 tops.
Nice.
He has a really nice signature at the bottom. He has a beautiful signature. So I picked that one up recently. Let's see what I have here. This is another one that I picked up recently. This is a Roger Maris autograph card from when he was at the Cardinals, I believe. This was his last season, 68. So, that's kind of where my space is. I'm not as much into modern cards. I like, I love baseball. That's my sport. And I've moved more in towards the vintage space and trying to get on-card on-card Hall of Fame autos. So that's where I'm focusing a little more now.
Yeah, I'm working on some of these vintage players that are still alive. Try to, get it in person. Not in person, but I'd rather have it through the mail rather than just buy it online. I just have that excitement. Maybe I have to send them a little money here and there, but I don't know. I think it's just more fun that way. I'm like, okay, I could bid online. I bought autographs of all these vintage guys, but it's not as fun as like going through the mail. Like, oh, are they going to respond?
Right.
And if they do, and like, oh, this is awesome.
Yeah, that was part of it. I kind of felt like a kid at some point because when I would send stuff off, I would come back home and check my mailbox every day, waiting to see if something would come back. And I haven't sent stuff through the mail in a while, but it was probably about 3 years ago. Over a course of a year, I probably sent off like one baseball a week to different guys. And I used that website, I think Sports Card Forum, SCF.
Yeah.
And you learned about what guys were good at getting back to you and which weren't. And I had really good success. I mean, I got most of my stuff back pretty quickly. One guy took about a year and a half to get back, but I got it. I got the baseball
back. Who is that?
It's a pitcher by the name of Bob Bolin. He pitched for the Giants in the 60s. He lives in North Carolina. He's probably in his early 80s now. My dad grew up a Giants fan, and I kind of collect a lot of Giants stuff because I grew up sort of learning about the guys he watched, and that was one of my dad's favorite pitchers. So I was able to send a baseball to him and get him to personalize it for my dad. It took about a year and a half, but I was so happy when I got it.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I think I DM'd you and I said, yeah, Ryan Sandberg sent me the card in 4 days. I get it. I live an hour and a half from him, but that was just awesome. I had to give him $10. Okay, $10. That's fine. But I mean,
the thing about that, he signed it, right?
His signature is so unique. It's one of the strangest signatures I've seen.
Yeah, his signature is unique. He gets his stuff back quickly. I sent a baseball to Ryan Sandberg, probably 2018, 2019. Got it back pretty fast. But, the thing about that is you also get to pick the card that you want him to sign. And there are some cards that present well with the signature and some that don't. And, when you're searching on eBay, it can be tough because I can be a little picky. And, I said, okay, I like the card, but you didn't put the signature where it would look great, or the signature isn't bold, and the card you showed me, I think it was a minor league card, if I'm correct.
Yeah, it was the 1981 TCMA. I think he was in Oklahoma City, and I think he was with the Phillies at that point, that minor league system. But yeah, I wanted that. I mean, I'm gonna probably send him a Cubs card soon, but
it gives you the ability to sort of pick the card that you think is going to present well. This card you showed me was nicely centered as a light background. You put a nice bold blue signature on it. It'll pass authentication. It's definitely his signature. If that's what you wanted to do, send it to PSA or whatever. But I agree with you. I think it's a lot more fun to send stuff through the mail. There's a little bit of risk there with them not getting your card back. I remember when I was 7 years old, I sent a rookie card, Craig Biggio rookie card to the Astrodome, hoping he would sign it. I never got it back. But I just ended up buying one a few months ago off PWCC. They had the same card, but with the signature on it. But I think if you do your research and you learn about the guys who are good at signing, you can do really well. And, yeah, some of them want $5 or $10, and that, to me, that's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. So, some a little more, some a little there, but
Yeah,
I want their signature that way rather
exactly.
than
Yeah,
go online. I bought Ferguson Jenkins. He used to pitch for the Cubs and was a
yeah,
pitching coach for the Cubs when I
yeah,
was a kid. And I picked up autographs slab $20 or
yeah,
something like that, $25 or BGS
yeah.
holder. I'd rather send it to him, pay a little more just to be like,
Sure.
hey, I got in the mail and I could keep
Yeah.
that envelope as, hey, maybe he'll send it to me, right?
I kind of want to send some stuff to some of the more sort of like obscure players. I grew up in Texas. I watched a lot of the Astros in the '90s, and I saw them play the Cubs a lot. Kerry Wood had that 20 strikeout game against
Right.
the.
I remember that.
But there are a lot of fringe players. I'm like, I wonder what Tony Eusebio is up to. Tony Eusebio was a catcher for the Astros who had a very decent career, but and I could never really find an address for him, but there's always kind of, I think it'd be kind of fun to, I don't know how many requests he gets, but I'm thinking about sort of fringe guys for the Cubs, like Steve Traxel, for instance,
Oh
or
yeah, I remember that.
Kevin
I want
Ory,
to send it to Sean Dunston,
Sean
shortstop.
Dunston. Yeah, I think
Yeah, I think he signs it.
yeah, I
And
think he
I
does.
just want it for my PC.
Sure. Henry Rodriguez, wasn't he the outfielder where they would throw like candy bars at him?
Yeah, I remember that. Like Moises Alou.
Moises Alou, yeah, he was an Astro. I mean,
Do you
um,
know what Moises Alou used to do? Allegedly.
I think he admitted to it.
Yeah.
He had a certain routine for his hands, I believe. Right.
Yeah. He used to piss on his hands for better grip.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that in a while, but he never wore batting gloves.
Oh, I
Moises
didn't know
Alou
that.
he was one of the
I
few
don't
ball
remember.
players that wore batting gloves, and you look at his numbers. He was up into his late 30s. I think he ended his career with the Mets, but he hit above 300 almost every damn year. He was just a solid hitter that no one really talks a lot about anymore. But yeah, I'd love to have a Moises Alou autograph card.
Yeah, I definitely love that too. And Felipe Alou, his dad.
Felipe
I don't know.
Alou, yeah. He's still around.
Yeah, he's alive. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look at some of the older comments here. Sorry, I can't get to all of them. Chris C says Beckett needs a name change. Hanky Panky grading service. So, have you been looking at the Beckett situation?
I have. It's kind of what a mess, huh? It's
Yeah,
like
I know.
definitely not a good look for them. Personally, I like having autograph. I'll show you a card that I do have in a Beckett holder. I don't really open boxes very much, but
Right.
this is one box. I opened up a box of 2020 Chrome baseball, and I was able to get this card. This is a Shohei Ohtani autograph super.
Nice.
It's a 1 of 1. And at the time, Ohtani, his prices were in the gutter because he didn't pitch very well during the shortened COVID season. He was injured, and but I was like, I'll keep it. I like having autograph cards in a Beckett holder, modern cards, so no, yeah, that I heard about the whole grading change fiasco, and it's just definitely not a good look for them. And the thing is, there are a lot of high value cards in Beckett holders, and you talked about this before, how as of 5-10 years ago, Beckett was the #1 grading company in the industry. And a lot of those Brady contenders cards, a lot of those high value, LeBron autos, they're in Beckett holders. And it doesn't seem like they've really done very much over the last couple of years to sort of keep up with the other guys. I don't know. What are your thoughts on everything?
So, yeah, I think I'm going to do a video on this, but yeah, from a marketing point of view, I've talked about this today. It's a disaster. They
Yeah,
didn't get a feel of the collectors and people in the hobby. I thought they should have done better marketing to try to get a feel of this. They made a mistake last year at the Mint Collective too. They wanted to come up with something new, but then they backtracked and with new labels. But the thing is, I was looking at some of these prices of Jordan and Brady, and this is what Fleer 86 and then what the Broman Chrome in a high grade BGS slabs. people discriminate based on subgrades. So if people are mad about this, I'm just saying, hey, look at the Brady sales, look at the Jordan sales, and ultimately the subgrades it's what matters. So yeah, you could see a 9 or a 9.5, but like sophisticated high-end investors care about ultimately the subgrades. So I mean, I want more data to look at it, but I mean, these are just two players with a lot of transactions for those two cards compared to everything else. So those are just my thoughts right now. I still have to do more digging, to be honest.
Yeah, it's always a little, it's when you have the 9.5, but then you have, one of the subgrades being a 9. It always, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, if I were to crack this and send this to PSA, is it, what's it going to come back as? I've cracked a few cards here and there, and a lot of them have come back PSA 9s when they don't have the quad 5, because usually that means there's a corner ding or a surface scratch or something like that. And so no, I think, yeah, I mean, for the guys who've been in the hobby for a long time, a lot of them, when they're buying Beckett slabs, they want that quad 9.5 or the 9 or the True Gem Plus. So
yeah, collector's dream, what's going on? And he says the Beckett marketing guy admitted on video they didn't do any surveys prior to announcing changes. I think that's ridiculous. I mean, I worked in a marketing company. I mean, this is just basic common sense to me. Or do something on social media. I don't know. Pay people for doing a poll. I don't know. I mean, it could have done focus group, whatever.
Sure. Yeah, and SGC has done a really good job. Their main guy has been, you see him at shows, you see him doing interviews with different channels. He seems to be pretty accessible, and I'm thinking over the last couple of years, has there really been someone like that for Beckett? I can't really think of anyone. And so yeah, I mean, I again, they still have a lot of big cards. There's still a lot of big cards out there in Beckett holders, but it doesn't seem like they've done a whole lot to try to maintain their place.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have Luca Nation. Do you know who those guys are?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I don't know who you know and who you don't, but I think they do advertising for them.
Okay.
Or I mean, I think Beckett has a collaboration with them. I mean, they could have worked with the Luca Nation Network just to get a feel of people maybe behind the scenes, like before they're doing interviews. I don't know, like something. I mean, this was just done terrible.
Right. Yeah. I think in retrospect, maybe it would have been good to get some input from collectors. And based on what they were doing, it sounds like their grading system would have devalued a lot of their current collectors' cards. Some of them would have been designated to be of a lower grade, and I'm sure that upset a lot of people.
Yeah, I wonder what they're gonna do now. Are they just gonna change 1 to a 10 and that's it, rather than have multiple 10s? I think they have different iterations where you could have gotten a 10 this way.
Right.
But I don't know. We shall see how that goes.
Yes. If you're the guy from
what happened?
Works, at least you could get Black
Are you
Label.
saying? Oh yeah, the Joe Clemens. Are you talking about that guy?
Yeah.
Brian Gray was on my program and he was describing, yeah. So that was quite interesting. I just don't know statistically how do you get those.
Yeah, I don't either. Yeah.
Very interesting.
It is.
Hanky Spankus. All right. Oh, he likes you. Okay, that's cool. He's also a Giants fan.
Yeah.
All right.
It's one person.
Chris C says nice Koufax from earlier.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Let's take a look at this. Get Mark Grace to auto a card with the inscription Slump Buster on it. I think Mark Grace is hard to get. I think you have to buy it on eBay. That's the way that I'll get it.
Something tells me he might charge you a little more for that Slump Busters inscription.
Yeah, probably.
You know that story about Mark Grace? Slump Buster story.
You'll have to refresh my memory.
Uh, he, I, I think at some point he did an interview or it came out that when he was in a slump, he would try to. Um, I'm trying to put this the right way. Uh, Go on a date with a more unattractive woman, and, and that would inevitably get him out of his slump.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
I believe that's somewhere at the back of my mind. I remember hearing that, so I think that's what he's alluding to. Um,
Very interesting.
yeah, Mark Grace
Wow.
was a really solid hitter. Another
Yeah,
guy,
he was
a lot of
consistent.
guys, never going to be a Hall of Famer, but just year in and year out, he hit for average. He played. I think you remember him playing pretty good defense. He was good for 20 plus home runs.
Yep. He did win a ring with the Diamondbacks towards his
Yeah,
end of
yes,
his career.
2001. Yeah, he did win a ring with them. Yeah,
Yep. Yeah, he got pissed off because the Cubs wouldn't pay him money. So
is
then
that,
he went to the Diamondbacks. The Tribune Company was terrible. I mean, you were what, an Astros fan growing up?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. I mean, are you still an Astros fan?
I've kind of gone more towards. I just like watching baseball now.
Oh, okay.
The whole Astros scandal of 2017 kind of put me off to the current or that group of players. Uh, but I just I like watching good games. I like watching Otani pitch. I like
Right.
watching. Uh, my wife and I, we live in. She's from LA, so
Yeah.
um, I watch Dodger games with her. But anyway, yeah. I mean, I watched a lot of Astros Cubs games in the '90s, early 2000s. Um, so I got to know a lot of those Cubs teams pretty well. Um, yeah, it
Interesting. Okay.
looks like
Yep.
Rod Beck.
Broadback, yeah, he passed away unfortunately, but I remember the 1998, what was it, the wild card game against, yeah, the Giants, right? It,
Trying
it
to
had
think,
to be the Giants, if I remember.
was that played at Wrigley?
Yeah, that was played at Wrigley, and I think they had Michael Jordan throw the first pitch or
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah, it was just amazing, and then Rod Beck closed it. So
yeah. I do remember the Astros lost. I'm sorry, the Giants lost a big game to the Cubs. I believe it was a night game at Wrigley, and it might have been like Sunday Night Baseball or something, if I'm remembering it. But yeah, Rod Beck was an interesting character. I think he like at spring training he would live in a trailer behind one of the ballparks.
I heard something like that.
Yeah,
He was quite interesting, and then that guy Wells on the Yankees, is that his name?
David Wells. Yeah,
Yeah, David Wells. I think he admitted to, like, being drunk or on drugs, if you believe the story, and did he throw a perfect game, or is that a no-hitter? I forget what it
that
was.
was a guy by the name of Doc Ellis. That was a pitcher for the Pirates in the early '70s, and he was on LSD, and he threw a no hitter. He walked a bunch of guys. I think he walked several guys. He hit a bunch of guys, but he threw a no hitter on LSD. There's a nice little like animation that someone did a few years back of the whole experience with.
Yeah.
I believe Doc Ellis narrates it, but on YouTube you could probably find it. But yeah,
Right, right.
that was Doc Ellis.
That's interesting. Really interesting. Alright, so I know, we discussed a little bit about some Hankus Pankus,
Yeah,
and I know you wanted to talk about this, but, we both, came in or like during the pandemic, this was a good escape because whatever someone's political beliefs or whatever, it was crazy. I
yeah,
mean, I was locked in the home and, a lot of events happened and sports cards just took me out of it. I mean, I was back in the hobby in 2018, but 2020, I was like, hey, look, they're giving people free money. The card prices are going to go up naturally. And it was a great distraction. So we both came into it. Could you explain a little bit during the pandemic what happened with you?
yeah. So for me, I worked. I was a at the time I was a fellow in gastroenterology at a county hospital in California, and things got bad pretty quickly in regards to COVID, and it was scary.
Yeah.
Was going into the hospital and still having to, some of the procedures that I do are procedures that we still had to, that were very important to do on, regardless of whether someone had active COVID or not. And so, yeah, I mean, it was a stressful time. And, if I, much like you, I started getting, I didn't have a lot to do at home. And for whatever reason, I can't remember exactly how, but I started getting on. I started seeing like box break videos on YouTube, and it kind of piqued my interest. Um, I hadn't opened a box in such a long time, and so then I, you know, I what I did was I just ordered a couple boxes. This I think this would be fun to do. I don't have anything else to do, so I ordered a couple boxes to open for myself, and then that's sort of how I got back into it. And I eventually had my parents send me over all my binders from when I was a kid of all my old cards. And again, I'm sure, just like a lot of people, it was mostly junk wax, but there are a few nice things in there. But then I just started learning more and more about cards, and I had been collecting autographs for a long time, but I've been collecting autographs sort of in a bubble. I didn't, there wasn't such thing as comps. When I buy like a autograph baseball, for example, like Steve Carlton or Fergie Jenkins, a guy like that, they're Hall of Famers, but their autographs are all everywhere. They sign a lot. It's like, yeah, $20 sounds about right for a Fergie Jenkins autograph, or 30 bucks for a Fergie Jenkins autograph baseball. It sounds right. I don't really care if one sold for 15 yesterday or 40 the next day. But with cards, it was a lot more nuanced. I realized very quickly. And as the year went on, and prices were going up, I started noticing certain things that were just a little off. And I sort of started learning more and more about fraud in the hobby, and sort of the history of fraud in the hobby. And you just realize that fraud has been rampant since day one, which is unfortunate, because again, this for a lot of people, this is a means of escapism. It's a hobby for a reason. You do this to sort of get out of the dredges of reality. And then but when you're having to deal with hanky panky behavior with the hobby, then it kind of sort of sours the experience. And so, yeah, that's at some point, I started, your stuff started popping up, and I think what you were saying just resonated a lot with what I was sort of observing over the pandemic.
Yeah, I didn't see too much in 2020. Maybe I just had my blinders on. I was just focused on, okay, I could get this card and I could sell it at a higher price. And then once I noticed that, okay, I knew SHTF would happen with this market February and March, and I was doing videos about that.
Yeah.
And I saw like crazy stuff, like people said, oh, I don't want to bash on people here, but people are saying, okay, this car that's, over $100,000, it's going to double next year based
Right.
on how everything's going. I'm like, that doesn't seem right.
Right.
That, I mean, yeah, I've done well during the pandemic. So then my tune started to change more in February and March. I had people on who understands markets, different markets, and then they're saying, hey, look, this doesn't seem right. And then everything started, to come down. And then I saw, hey, look, the Fed's going to probably raise rates. That's when I started going after Curator. And
Right.
then, I did videos to Jeff Wilson. I'm like, hey, look, interest rates are going to go higher and things are going to get back to normal. Like, hey, look, this is not sustainable. Right. And then people just started coming right after me. And then I'm like, wait a second, something doesn't seem off. This is like the real world now. Right. Because
Yeah.
people are now, choosing sides. Right. Like politically.
Right.
And
Right.
And then after I went after Curator, that's when people just started sending me all this information about Hanky Panky, which you probably
Mhm.
know more about. And then I'm like, oh my God, this is where I come for an escape, and it's just
Right.
not it
It's
wasn't
as,
an escape for a while because I saw like this is insane.
it's as divisive as talking about politics. That's
Right. Yeah.
and it's very polarizing because I think you have a lot of people who are preaching positivity and want to keep uh, don't want to think about a lot of this stuff. Which is fine if you want to sort of collect in a vacuum, but you have to realize that at some point, a lot of these things are going to start to affect. Essentially, fraud is going to affect a whole bunch of stuff. If and I think I applaud guys like yourself and um, some of the other people you had on. I think it does take courage to sort of be a bit of a contrarian and say, hey, I don't agree with what most of you are saying. And, that may impact my ability to, thrive in this hobby if I have a bit of a contrarian view. But, you spoke your truth. And I had a lot of respect for that. And, one other guy that sort of got a lot of backlash was Vegas Dave. And I don't, not a particularly a fan of his, but what he said, he was right essentially when he made that video
Right.
about there being a crash. Um, but I see like Ryan McClanahan is a guy who I've enjoyed his appearances on your streams. He's has a lot of knowledge. Um, yeah. So yeah, hobby. Yeah, fraud's been around
Right.
as for a long, long time.
Yep, yep, yep. And I'm just thinking, so you messaged me about the accountability of the auction house. Is that what you messaged me about? It's that like, okay,
Yeah.
okay,
So
so go ahead.
yeah. So my it's interesting that there was a Probstein did an interview with the sports card therapist guy about a year ago.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised because he actually asked him a couple of tough questions. One of them being was, do you have any association with Bill Mastro? And what Probstein said was, yeah, Mastro consigns cards through me. And Probstein's opinion was, I understand Mastro's history, but he's done his penance. He's paid his debt to society. Why shouldn't I do business with him? And that's when it really got me thinking, like, okay, if Mastro, a guy like Mastro, is able to sell his cards through these auction houses, who else is able to? And for me personally, buying vintage cards, I would want to know if I was buying a card from Bill Mastro, if I was bidding on a card from Bill Mastro. I'm not gonna. I understand he did his time, but it, if a card has gone through his hands, it makes me concerned that the card may be altered, right? And so, at that point, I started thinking, gosh, what other sort of unscrupulous characters are doing business with these auction houses? If I was trying to get rid of a card that I, was altered and I didn't care about passing it on to the next person, an auction house would be a perfect place to pass that card off, right? There's like no, there's you don't know who you're getting on the buyer side. You don't know who you're getting your card from, and you go and look at all those Mastro documents, and you can see that entire list of all the. I think you've gone over that a little bit on your previously, but you can see all the list of all the um, guys who had essentially shill bid for each other, and there were some big names on that list. And yeah, I think one guy who got really screwed over there was Keith Olbermann. He the radio personality. He bought a lot
Right,
of high
right.
value cards through the Mastro auction house. So I did a little research there, and the thing is, a lot of these cards that I really like, unfortunately, end up on the PWCC platform. They end up on Golden, and could there be someone show bidding against me? Absolutely, there could be. The thing is, I'm never gonna, I am never gonna be able to figure that out. All I can do is really bid to a price that I'm comfortable with, and if the price goes above, what I bid, I'm not gonna increase my bid. But yeah, I mean, with the lack of transparency uh, with a lot of these auction houses, and I think you even uncovered on one of these auction houses in the in the fine language, it says that some of these sellers can, or people from that auction house could bid up their own auctions, correct?
Technically,
So,
yes.
and ideally, I would not do business with these auction houses, but unfortunately, some of the best cards, some of the cards that I really like go through their hands, and so I would, in my opinion, I think you have four big auction houses, right? You have Heritage, Golden, PWCC, and then maybe you want to count like Probstein or Leland's. Um, and how many of those auction houses have been investigated or are associated with fraud? I think more than one, right? Um, so
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, these,
it's just it's kind of sad.
yeah, it's pretty bad. And I know that I think Sports Card Radio made the allegation that PWCC may have had someone that's doctoring cards on the inside. Now,
Right.
I don't have the receipts for that. They probably do because, a lot of people send items to them. People send stuff to me, but I haven't seen all of that. I think I've seen some things regarding PWCC that were sent to me, and I'm like, holy crap, this is insane.
Yeah.
And I think that information went to them as well. So that's just crazy. And then I was doing videos on potential money laundering, and people just went after me. And I'm like, wait, what? Why are people coming after me? And then now there could potentially be going money laundering with one of the auction houses that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
So, and I know Sports Card Radio showed a mugshot of Shine the other
Right.
day. I'm like, wow, they had the guts to do that. And Hobby Shark has come on my
Yeah.
program talking about this.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, where is the money coming from?
Right.
Hopefully it's coming from legit sources, but these are questions that need to be asked. And I
Absolutely.
think, and not many people will want to talk about it because look, you talk about it, you're going to be canceled.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean,
And I get it. I'm not hating on some of these guys in the industry. It's just like, hey, if you're putting food on the table for your family, you can't talk about it.
I think
You
that's
gotta
what
have-
gives guys like the fact guys like you and Splenda and Hobby Shark, you guys all have, and living with LT, you guys all have jobs. You can this you're not dependent on the hobby for income or for providing for your family.
Right.
Oh. No. Okay. I don't know what happened there. But yeah, for a lot of these dudes that are in the hobby, they're dependent on their relationships with the big dogs to sustain themselves long term. So I guess I understand, they can't speak up as much about it. But no, yeah, all the more credit to you and the other guys for doing what you do.
Yeah, LT is the one that like put everything together, so that
Yeah.
helped out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in terms of just prices, you said that okay, all the big auction houses have the cards that you want.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, okay, even eBay. I was just like bidding up trying to buy up a Mazurowski rookie card. It was a raw
Yeah.
card. And like one sale I think was like under 30, and then all of a sudden I started getting involved with this other card, and I'm thinking, wait, is the other person now shill bidding because this
Sure.
is way more than the card that just sold, and
Right.
it's not in the best condition. I'm like, okay, I'm just wondering like who else is shilling on that end.
Yeah. Showing is a huge issue. I've sold, some just lots of these 50-cent relic cards, right, that I had laying around. I put them in a lot of 10 and I put them on auction, and those damn things were shilled by someone. They went unpaid for. Like, so it's like if people are doing this kind of thing with the low end items, imagine what's going on um, with
High end.
and it makes it really tough when you're trying to buy a card like in person, or you're trying to come up with a comp for a card, because then you have to sift through all this junk data, and you try going to a card show and trying to convince a dealer, listen, this card, I understand that this comp was X amount, but look at who won. It was a zero feedback buyer. Like, that is not that's not what the card went for. So it creates a whole lot of problems, and yeah, it's rampant. And I think one of the things I learned, what Probstein said during that interview with the therapist, was that he noticed that the Trae Young market at that point was wildly manipulated. That someone was putting a lot of time into trying to sustain Trae Young's prices.
Right.
And I think, it was the same thing with Mahomes, right? You talked about that in some of your videos. His
Right.
Prism Silver was being shilled to high heaven for a while.
Yeah, the optic hollow as well.
Yeah.
The thing is, I don't understand. Maybe you could provide me context. Why were people getting mad when I just highlighted this? I said, hey, it's zero review. This looks like a fake sale.
That's a good question. I think, again, if you're standing to try to provide for your family by, buying and selling in this hobby, you want to, I think it would behoove you to sort of keep people happy, to keep the consumer hidden from a lot of the warts of the hobby. Um, a lot of money was flowing early on because you had a lot of novices who were just buying and buying and buying. And I'm sure that the guys, some of these hobby types were really happy with that scenario, because they were doing really well. But as the consumer becomes more experienced and smarter, and you realize that a lot of these prices really aren't correct, then that over the long run may hurt the bottom line for some of the other folks in the hobby. So I think there are some people who would prefer to keep the average consumer less educated, and so, yeah, I mean, if I were that kind of person, I wouldn't want people to know what show bidding was or how widespread it was. Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. I wanted to transition. You also sent me something that I never heard of, the
Yeah.
WIWAG scandal. So what's that for some people that have never heard of it?
Yeah. So there was this group. So there's these a couple of guys, and this is all public information, by the way. It's actually on a press release from the PSA website. There were a couple of guys who had this company called When It Was a Game, and they specialized in buying and selling vintage cards. Well, the way the story goes, these guys were able to, at some point, obtain the sonic welders that PSA used to, slap cards up. And what they were doing, and this was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, they would purchase, like, for instance, a PSA 4 1966 Hank Aaron card. And then what they would do is that they would replicate the label and create a label for a PSA 6 Hank Aaron 55, crack out the card that was in the PSA 4 holder, and then slab it up as a PSA 6. And they would go off and sell it. That was the alleged sort of grift of theirs. And I think they did this for a long time. And so I believe they were caught because they eventually did this with a serial numbered card. I think it was like a Bonzi Wells. I think he was a running back for the Arizona Cardinals. But anyway, they got caught because they eventually did this with a serial numbered card. And I think the FBI got involved, the U.S. Attorney General's office got involved, and they eventually were convicted of mail fraud, and they got a slap on the wrist I don't think they did any jail time. I think they just had to pay a little bit of money. But the end result was you have all of these counterfeit cards that are in circulation now. I think mostly vintage, that are overgraded, and which is sort of a scary thought to me for someone who buys vintage cards. I'm a little more concerned when it's an old label PSA holder card, because sometimes I look at it, I'm like, how the heck did this card get a 6 or a 7? Is it because PSA's grading standards were less at the time, or is it the result of the handiwork of these two dudes? The interesting thing is, one of these guys is still active and has a very big account on eBay. And if you go on the Blowout website, as of 2020, there's a huge thread about this person's account and how they may still. There's a question about whether they're still engaging in the hanky panky with trimming and so forth. But I don't think many people, guys like Ryan McClanahan, guys who've been around for a while, I'm sure are very familiar with this story. But history has a way of repeating itself. And now, as of a few months ago, we heard about that dude from Utah who was selling counterfeit Jordans in fake slabs. Same sort of grift, it sounds like. He was cracking and then putting them in a different holder. If the benefit of talking about these things and educating people is, it helps to, if more and more people knew that there were, that some of this stuff happened, I think, and they knew some of these dudes were still active in the hobby, it would make you more leery of doing business with them. This account on eBay, has large amounts of feedback and is very active in selling vintage cards. I myself, having learned what I did, would never buy from them ever. I once, they had a very nice raw Koufax. I think it was a 57 or 58 Koufax that I was interested in. And I messaged them and I said, listen, could you tell me why this card is raw? Like a lot of your other cards are graded. Was this card not graded because it was deemed to be altered by PSA? And they gave me a very sort of generic response saying, no, none of our cards we don't sell cards that have been rejected by PSA, X, Y, and Z. But it made me very leery of buying that particular card from them. And, I would, I wouldn't buy from this particular account ever.
Yeah, I mean, that's news to me, because now I'm looking at some vintage cards, like nothing like high grade. And, I'm just saying, hey, look, I might as well buy now, because people are just, I mean, they've lost a lot of money during the pandemic or post-pandemic, and not a lot of people are looking at vintage. The younger guys, maybe except the Sasha T, is looking at vintage.
Yeah,
that's what I've seen.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, hey, look, and people will still buy, like a Juan Marichal card. And, I bought one today. It wasn't that high of a grade. So I'm thinking, okay, I mean, people will still want to buy it in tough times.
Yeah.
And right now, it's not the best economy, but people are still buying cards. People will always buy cards.
And with vintage, I think, it's the higher grade, older label cards that sort of concern me. Is there a chance that some of the vintage cards I have been trimmed? Yeah, it's very possible. I don't think there's a way for me to figure that out now. They've all been authenticated by PSA or SGC, but for in the past, PSA hasn't been great about catching alterations.
Do you think that there's some payoffs going on, or at least back in the day? Because someone came to me saying that, hey, look, I have reason to believe that maybe some of these graders at PSA were paid bribes and they were grading allegedly these Jordan PMG cards that may have been trimmed or altered. I mean, do you think there's kickbacks going around, or at least in the past? Have you read anything about that?
I haven't read anything about that particular grift, but if that came to light at some point, I don't think it would necessarily surprise me knowing what we do now about a lot of the stuff that's going on. Um, yeah, Brandon Ryan's history isn't repeating itself, but it's definitely got to run. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that was one of my most viewed videos where I
yeah,
talk about the repeat of history.
yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Chris sees. I think a lot of vintage cards have been trimmed. Yeah, I think so too. And then what I'm also doing is like some of the vintage cards, I'm like, hey, look, I'm cracking them. I want maybe an autograph from one of these
Sure.
guys. And then if I go back to PSA saying, oh no, this is authentic. So I'm like, oh well.
That's the other thing is signature authentication to me seems like it's a pseudoscience. Like what is that process? Like,
I have no idea. I mean, they look at. I think Ryan would probably know a little bit more about this. I'll have to ask him, but they look at some signatures they have in their database and
right,
then they just go back off of it and then they do
right.
some research on it.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do that, to be honest. I mean, like for like even vague cards. Like I have a very scarce card of Roger Federer from 2001.
Mhm.
It's from a magazine, a French magazine. And I sent it to PSA. PSA said that, sorry, we can't grade it. We don't have enough information. But then SGC has the information. They graded it. So
Yeah.
I don't know, like, what's the process of all of this?
Right. Right. Yeah. You know, there was one other instance of fraud, not necessarily in cards, but there was a guy in the 90s. I think his last name was Marino, but he got really good at faking Mickey Mantle's signature. He was
The
based
90s Operation Bullpen or Ballpark or
exactly,
one of those two?
yeah, exactly, Operation Bullpen. And I mean, this guy he must have put out tens of thousands of fake Mantle signatures on all sorts of memorabilia, baseballs, uh, jerseys, everything. And a lot of that stuff was authenticated and it's still out there. Um, he did time for that.
So people right now, they may have had authenticated mantles in a that's authenticated by PSA or whatever,
Yeah,
and they're selling it on the secondary market.
yeah. I mean,
That's crazy.
but exactly. I mean, where's the paper trail there? I mean, you you just don't know. I mean, that's the risk of buying, autographed items online. Is I prefer. There are some companies like that will. I think like Beckett, yeah, Greg Marino, yeah, exactly. There are some companies that will stipulate this was an in-person authenticated signature. Like there was a witness who verified that this athlete signed this piece of memorabilia. And so I would try to, when I was more collecting autograph baseballs and so forth, I would lean towards buying those items as opposed to the ones that were just sort of, some person in the back of PSA said, yeah, that looks similar to one that's on our
On
database.
file.
Yeah. But, yeah. And so, all the more reason to try and get autographs yourself. As an adult, I think really the only means you have of doing that are going to a show and getting the athlete yourself, or doing what you've been doing and sending this stuff through the mail. But yeah, I mean, you go back to that point that Marino's the guy who got with the Mantle autographs. I mean, his stuff is still out there for sure. And a bunch of those vintage cards from the when it was a game scandal, they're still out there.
Yeah, that's crazy to know because now I'm thinking, okay, the economy may be a little volatile. So I think that I want to naturally go to vintage, but then you're telling me these stories from what 20 years ago. They're changing these slabs, and then you have these cards that are
Yeah.
overgraded.
Yeah.
So then you go to vintage cards and newer slabs. Is that how you do it? Or and then, like you said, with autographs, that makes sense. You go to a show, you send it through the mail.
Yeah. I mean, I anecdotally, I think you hear that PSA is a little more strict on grading of vintage cards now than they were previously, and I do think that newer label vintage cards do sort of command a little more of a premium. I personally am more comfortable buying newer slab vintage cards. That's just my feeling about things. I always sort of hesitate when I see a nice vintage card in an old label, and it just makes me think: is this, has this been doctored? Was this the result of the when it was a game scandal, or whatever?
So if I'm buying a Fleer 86 card, if it's cheaper, then just stay away.
Yeah, I
For
mean,
Jordan.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I yeah, you have to be really careful with that 86 Fleer.
And then now they're grading the star cards.
Yeah, they are.
So I don't know how that's going to be. Like, are they
Yeah,
grading some fakes? I don't know.
yeah.
I hope not.
Yeah, they because they weren't doing that for a while, right? Because of that whole issue with I think there was an allegation that Star was printing more of those of their
Right.
Star cards
Afterwards, yeah.
Yeah, and so I would guess that maybe PSA avoided authenticating those Star cards because maybe they didn't have a good method of differentiating between the original and the reprint copies, and maybe they figured out a way to do that now. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I read there's this one dude who used to work at, I think it was, what's the printing company? I forget what the dude's name, but he sells a bunch of the star cards right now.
Uh-huh.
And I think he gave PSA and Beckett like guidelines on how to grade these cards or whether they're real or not.
The funny thing is, I've sort of switching things up, but I've
Yeah.
probably graded about 2,000 cards through PSA myself. I've only consigned or gone through a third party for about 10 cards. And do you know who that was?
PWCC?
No. What
Probstein?
I mean is Mark's Cards.
Oh, 10 cards. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. So that was an early introduction to the hanky panky. I live about an hour and a half away from where those guys were set up,
Yeah.
and I met them. And at the time, PSA was only allowing group submitters to submit through the like $100 level, and I just happened to have 10 cards that I couldn't submit myself because they didn't let me. And so I was like, these Mark's Cards guys seem legitimate. They've been submitting cards for a whole bunch of people. This was, I think, December 2021. And so I dropped my cards off with them. They had a very small shop in Camarillo, California here. And, they took my cards in, they charged me. And then not 2 weeks later did that video come out from the, what's his name?
Card collector too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't trust. The problem that I have is, hey, if I'm going to send my cards to someone, then okay, they may be legitimate, but then it could be lost through the mail. I think there were group submitters in London or somewhere in Europe where they had a package lost in the mail, and then the insurance wouldn't cover it for some reason. Right. I forget the story. I did it in a video. So I'm like, okay, there's just so much back and forth that even if they're good people, then what happens in a situation like that? That's just my thought process with group submitters. I don't like, you have to send the PSA and then PSA sends it to you. And I'm thinking, wait, what if it's one in 1,000 chances that my card gets lost, which does happen.
Yeah. My thing with that was that I submitted my cards to do Mark's Cards December 2021. Per the CC2 video, I think he said he took all of his cards or paid off the debt from his cards a month before. So PSA knew that Mark's Cards wasn't following up with payment on a bunch of their orders. My question is, why did PSA allow them to continue to submit?
They were submitting during that CC2 situation too?
Yeah, because I submitted my cards a month after he said he picked his card, or he wrote a check, essentially. And so there was myself and a whole bunch of other people who submitted through Mark's Cards. after that went down, it would have been nice to know what was going on. It would have been, in retrospect, you think, why didn't PSA just shut these guys down? Maybe PSA did, and they were submitting through like a buddy's account or something. I don't know. But it would have been nice for CC2 to say something, in my opinion.
I think CC2 is very careful in how he presents himself. I've noticed that about him. He doesn't want to deal with drama. He's very careful. He has endorsements, and he's part of Fanatics, or Fanatics is going to be supplying his company with product. So I understand why he's careful in what he says. If I were in his shoes, there'd be no way I'd be doing these videos. I would not be doing a video with you, to be honest. And the other guys, I wouldn't do it with LT, Steve, etc.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. I couldn't, because then I'm out of the industry.
Right. Yeah, that's how he.
That's committing suicide in the hobby.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyways, it's a 1 hour mark. So is there any other things that you wanted to mention before we head off? Like any other topics?
No, not in particular. I think we kind of hit most of the topics that were of interest. No, but I want to thank you for having me on, and I appreciate all the content you put out.
Thank you. Yeah.
Appreciate
it, because the last week people were just like coming after me on Instagram like crazy.
Yeah.
And on YouTube. So it's good to hear that.
Yeah.
All right. And before we head off, where can people find you?
So I have an Instagram account. It's Imperial Sports Cards, all one word. I don't make content. I don't have any desire to really. But yeah, I'm on Instagram.
Awesome. We'll have you on another time for sure.
Appreciate it.
Awesome. Talk to you later, man.
Thanks for your time, Rahul. You have a good one.
You too.